There are moments in a sports life when the geography shifts. Not the geography of a court, not the 44 feet between baskets, not the lane painted in a color that differs by franchise, but the geography of where the sport lives in the imagination of a watching world. Those moments rarely announce themselves loudly. They arrive in quiet transmissions. A box score from an unfamiliar city. A tip-off at an hour that requires one hemisphere to stay awake while the other sleeps. A 7'2" Filipino center throwing down a two-handed flush in a gym in Shiga, Japan, while a man who once shared a locker room with NBA All-Stars laces up his shoes on the opposing bench. Pay attention. That is what is happening right now. Kai Sotto has been the longest-running question mark in Asian basketball for 4 years. 4 years of projections and workouts and showcases and draft declarations and one devastating night in June of 2022 when his name simply wasn't called. He was 19 years old when that happened. 19 years old, 7'2", still learning how to use a body that most human beings never have to negotiate with, and the league that had been the destination his entire life told him, not in words, but in silence, that he wasn't quite ready. What followed was not the end of the story. It was, as we now understand, only the middle of the first chapter. The NBA G.League came next. Then Adelaide in the Australian NBL, where the physicality of oceanic basketball seasoned him in ways that no development camp ever could. Then Japan, Shiga Lakestars, a franchise in a league that the rest of the basketball world has been dismissing for 2 decades while it quietly built something worth watching. The B.League of Japan, founded formally in 2016 through the merger of 2 competing professional circuits, has grown into one of the most consequential competitions in Asia. They have the attendance. They have the television infrastructure. They have foreign players of legitimate pedigree. And now, in the season we are currently watching unfold, they have an active player with genuine NBA experience suiting up on a team that will stand across the hardwood from Kai Sotto before the final buzzer sounds. Consider what that sentence would have meant to someone in 1999, when Yuta Tabeus was the only Japanese player with even a peripheral NBA story, one that would not fully materialize until 2004 when he appeared in 4 games for the Phoenix Suns. 4 games that felt, at the time, like a footnote and feel now, in retrospect, like a prologue. The league that Tabeus navigated alone now commands the attention of players who have experienced what he could only dream about. That is not a footnote. That is a tectonic shift in the sports center of gravity. Sotto stands at the intersection of several enormous narratives at once, and it is worth taking each of them seriously on its own terms before we try to understand how they collapse into each other. The Filipino basketball story is among the oldest and most emotionally complex in international basketball. The Philippines has been playing organized basketball since American colonial administration introduced it to the archipelago in the early 20th century. For a country of over 100 million people, basketball is not a pastime. It is a civic religion. The Philippine Basketball Association, established in 1975, is the second oldest professional basketball league in the world, trailing only the NBA itself by 29 years. The national team, Gilas Pilipinas, has been a fixture in FIBA competitions for generations. And yet, for all of that history, for all of that passion, no player born in the Philippines has ever stood on an NBA court in a regular season game. That fact hangs over every conversation about Filipino basketball like a storm front that never fully breaks. Sotto was supposed to be the one who changed it. The expectation was enormous from the moment he enrolled in the NBA Academy in Australia at 17, a young man already taller than most NBA centers, blessed with footwork and a soft touch from 15 feet that suggested a ceiling that was genuinely difficult to calculate. The projections were real. The hype was not misplaced. And then the machinations of NBA roster construction did what they always do to big men in an era that was still sorting out how to value size against mobility. They hesitated. They watched. They wanted more games, more data, more certainty before committing a precious roster spot to a 7-footer who had not yet played a professional game that mattered. What Sotto has done since that moment of hesitation is something that basketball observers should study with genuine care. He did not retreat into bitterness. He did not chase a shortcut back into the conversation. He went to Adelaide and played 41 games in the 2022-23 NBL season, averaging over 10 points and nearly 6 rebounds, numbers that undersell his impact because what the box score cannot tell you is that he was learning to play against physical men with professional habits, learning to set screens with the precision timing that creates open threes rather than obstruction fouls, learning to roll to the rim with an angle that gives his guard a choice rather than a commitment. He was doing the work. Quietly, 10,000 miles from the arenas that matter to American basketball media. Japan brought a different education. The B.League plays a pace that demands from its big men both verticality and lateral range. Sotto's role with the Lakestars has evolved through his time there in ways that speak directly to the question of whether he belongs in the highest level of this sport. His pick-and-roll defense, which was always the analytical pressure point, the moment when a scout would toggle back in the film, watching to see whether he could guard the ball handler without fouling, without losing his assignment, without surrendering the pocket pass that turns a half-court set into a layup, has measurably improved. The footwork that critics questioned now shows a hip rotation that comes 2 beats earlier than it did in Adelaide. He is learning to anticipate rather than react, and at 7'2", that distinction is the difference between being a cloggable liability and being an anchor. His offensive game has grown in an even more interesting direction. Sotto is not simply a rim runner who finishes above the defense. He has developed a face-up game at the elbow that includes a turnaround jumper over the right shoulder that would not be out of place in the repertoire of a player making $20 million a year in North America. He can catch in the post, feel pressure on his hip, and make a decision, kick out to the corner, drop step for the left-handed layup, or take the turnaround, with a composure that only comes from repetition and confidence. That composure is new. You can see the difference between the version of Sotto who went undrafted in 2022 and the version who now occupies the frontcourt for Shiga. The young man is becoming a player. And then, into this already charged atmosphere, comes a player who has walked the floors of an NBA arena not as a visitor, not as a prospect, but as a professional. An active roster member, someone who has answered to an NBA head coach on a game night, who has sat in an NBA locker room between quarters, who has felt the specific texture of that life from the inside. The B.League has been attracting players of this caliber with increasing regularity, and the reasons are not mysterious. The salaries are competitive for players outside the NBA's top 3 tiers. The quality of life in Japanese cities for professional athletes is excellent. The competition, while not equivalent to the NBA, is genuine enough to keep a player sharp. And there is something else, something harder to quantify but plainly visible to anyone who has watched the B.League's trajectory over the last 5 years. The league has become a destination, not a consolation. Players are choosing Japan. That is a different sentence from players settling for Japan. When these two stories collide on a hardwood floor in a Japanese gymnasium, the immediate basketball question is fascinating, and the larger question is even more so. The immediate question is straightforward. Where does Sotto match up? A player with NBA experience brings with them specific habits, pick-and-roll reads that come from encountering the league's most sophisticated offensive systems, defensive positioning that reflects the principles of an NBA coaching staff, a physical conditioning standard that the best players in the world maintain. These are not trivial advantages. Against a still-developing 7-footer, they create an examination that reveals more than any individual workout ever could. How does Sotto handle an opponent who has operated at the highest level? How does his body navigate against someone whose professional experience outweighs his own? Does his improvement in hip rotation hold against someone who has spent time in an environment that demands exactly that speed? The tactical analysis here is specific and worth dwelling on. If the NBA player is a guard or forward, the question for Sotto becomes one of perimeter containment. Can he protect the pick-and-roll assignment without fouling? Can he close out on a catch-and-shoot without conceding either the mid-range or the drive? Can he switch when necessary without surrendering a mismatch? The improvements to his lateral quickness, documented in his B.League games this season, suggest the answer is a more confident yes than it would have been 2 years ago. His closing speed has improved, driven by a conditioning regimen that is visibly more refined than the one that accompanied him to Adelaide, and his ability to show on the ball handler rather than jumping at fakes has become more reliable. If the NBA player is a big man, the conversation shifts entirely to post-positioning, to footwork, to the specific vocabulary of two professionals competing in the paint. Sotto's advantage there is almost certainly size and length. At 7'2" with a wingspan that scouts have measured generously above that, he presents a structural challenge that most players in any professional league are simply not equipped to navigate. His ability to alter shots without fouling, to elevate on an angle that interferes with the shooter's arc without making contact, is a skill he has been refining with notable success. His block numbers in Japan reflect not just athleticism but positioning, and positioning is learned, not given. The psychological dimension of this game matters as much as the tactical one. Sotto has lived for 4 years with the knowledge that the highest level of the sport decided he was not yet ready. That knowledge can break a young player. It can hollow out the competitive instinct that got him there in the first place. What we have seen instead, and this is the detail that makes Sotto's story genuinely compelling rather than simply sympathetic, is that it has sharpened him. He is hungry in a way that players who enter the league without detours sometimes are not. The chip on his shoulder is not the performance of grievance. It is the engine of daily work. Opponents in Japan have spoken about the intensity with which he approaches individual matchups, the level of preparation that suggests a player who understands that every game is an argument he is making in front of an audience that is always, in some corner of his attention, the NBA front offices he has not yet convinced. Against a player with actual NBA experience, that hunger meets its most direct test. This is not a college teammate or a young European developing alongside him. This is someone who has already passed through the gate that Sotto is still standing in front of. The competition becomes, in a very real sense, a referendum. Can Sotto perform at a level commensurate with someone who already belongs at the next level? Can he do it consistently enough, and visibly enough, to restart a conversation in league front offices that has been quieter than it should be given his development? The B.League's global infrastructure has changed what it means to compete in Japan. Games are streamed internationally. Statistics are cataloged by analytics departments in 10 NBA cities. The idea that playing in Japan means playing in obscurity is, at this point, simply false. Scouts attend. Footage circulates. When Kai Sotto has a performance that matters, it does not disappear into a regional highlight reel that nobody outside Southeast Asia ever watches. It lands in the same databases that inform decisions about two-way contracts and summer league rosters. The presence of an NBA experienced player on the opposing roster only amplifies that visibility. It provides a context marker, a calibration point, that makes any evaluation of Sotto's performance that night meaningfully more legible to the people doing the evaluating. The implications for the Philippine Basketball Federation are significant and run in multiple directions simultaneously. A strong performance from Sotto against NBA-level competition strengthens the case for bringing him into the Gilas Pilipinas rotation for the next window of FIBA competition. The national program has been navigating complicated eligibility questions and roster construction challenges with a candor that is unusual for a national federation, and having Sotto at the height of his B.League powers provides a front-court anchor that changes what the coaching staff can draw up. The national team's defensive scheme in the paint, which has been exposure-prone against longer opponents at the FIBA level, looks categorically different with a healthy, confident, motivated Kai Sotto standing behind the defense. For Japan's basketball ecosystem more broadly, this moment is worth understanding in its proper historical context. The country has been building toward legitimate international basketball significance for 20 years. The 2006 FIBA World Championship expansion to Japan ignited a national conversation that took another decade to translate into structural reform. The 2016 unification of the professional leagues into the B.League was the pivotal institutional decision. The 2021 Tokyo Olympics, which gave the Japan national team a home stage and gave the Japanese public a window into basketball at the highest level, was the cultural accelerant. And the subsequent years of B.League investment in international talent, in arena infrastructure, in broadcast technology, have created a league that can credibly claim to be the most important professional basketball competition in Asia that is not itself a developmental pipeline for the NBA. Having a player with genuine NBA experience choose the B.League is not a curiosity. It is a validation. It tells the market that Japan basketball is a legitimate professional destination, and it tells young players watching from across Asia, from the Philippines, from China, from Korea, from Indonesia, that the B.League is a place where meaningful basketball happens. That message compounds with time. Step back from the immediate competition and sit with this question. What does the next decade of basketball look like if Kai Sotto walks into an NBA locker room? The answer is not simply that the Philippines gets to claim its first NBA player, though that moment, when it comes, will be one of the most emotionally significant in the history of that country's relationship with this sport. The answer is larger than that. The NBA has been expanding its international footprint with serious institutional intent for 30 years, since the Dream Team opened the world's eyes in Barcelona in 1992. The European market has been fully integrated for 2 decades. The Australian pipeline has produced all-stars and franchise players and multiple most valuable player votes. The African market is under active development through the Basketball Africa League, which launched in 2021 with a kind of resources and organizational support that signals genuine long-term commitment rather than promotional theater. And Southeast Asia, with its 600 million people, its extraordinary basketball culture, its specific hunger for a player who looks like them at the highest level of the sport, remains the last major population center waiting for its first legitimate NBA representative. Sotto is 23 years old. He is still in the ascent. The game we are watching him play in Japan right now, with its specific tactical pressures and its specific opponents and its specific stakes for his ongoing evaluation, is not the final chapter of this story. It may not even be the most important chapter. What it is, unambiguously, is a turning point, a moment in which the variables that will determine the rest of his career are either confirming or complicating the trajectory that his 4 years of professional development have suggested. The players who came before him in this particular form of basketball purgatory, the prospects who were deemed not quite ready and who had to find other stages on which to prove the league's judgment wrong, have not always found their way back. Some did. Some did not. The difference, more often than not, was not talent. It was the quality of the circumstances they found while they waited, and the degree to which those circumstances demanded and produced actual growth rather than merely preserved the prospect's status. Sotto has found circumstances in Japan that are demanding real growth. The presence of an NBA-experienced player in the same competition only sharpens that demand. There is a version of the next 2 years in which Kai Sotto walks into an NBA arena as an active player and the roar from the Filipino community. In the arena, in Manila, in every Filipino household in every city that has a Filipino household, which is to say nearly every city on earth, shake something loose in the sport's history that has been waiting to be shaken loose for 100 years. There is a version in which he does not quite make it, in which the NBA's requirements for a rim-running defensive big man continue to outpace his development, and in which he builds a career in Asia that is legitimate and meaningful and accompanied by deep love from a country that has always claimed him as its own. The truth is that we do not yet know which version we are watching. The game in front of us is one more piece of evidence being entered into a file that has not yet reached its verdict. What we know with certainty is that the evidence is accumulating in a direction that is worth paying close attention to. Because when this particular verdict finally comes down, when Sotto either walks through that door or confirms that a different path was always meant to be his, it will say something not just about one player's career, but about the sport's willingness to see talent in the places it has not always thought to look. That is the kind of question that keeps you awake in the late hours of a gymnasium in Shiga. It is the kind of question that makes this game, this specific game, on this specific night, worth watching very carefully.